Raising your second fund. As I was planning raising the second fund for TDK Ventures, I couldn't find any resources of how other corporate VCs had done it. So today, I will be sharing our learnings on how we raised our second fund. My name is Nicolas Sauvage, and I'm the president of TDK Ventures, the corporate VC arm of TDK. We invest globally in early-stage startups that unlock an attractive and sustainable future. Our first fund was $50 million. We launched it in July 2019, 3 years ago. And our second fund was launched in April 2021 for 3 times the size, $150 million. There are 6 considerations I would like to propose as a framework for how to think about raising your second fund. 1, why do you want to raise a second fund? 2, when do you need to launch your second fund publicly? 3, when do you need to start raising your second fund? 4, who should get involved? 5, how do you get teams involved and inspired? 6, how much should you be thinking about for your second fund? So let's start with why do you want to raise a second fund? And the first lesson for us was it cannot be because you're running out of money from your fund 1. It can happen, but really you want to have something much more inspiring. Number 2 is really it is easier to raise your second fund if the why of your fund 2 aligns nicely why you started your corporate VC in the first place, and it aligns with the why of your fund 1. Especially as you're still building the portfolio of your first fund and everything is fresh and everyone knows what you're doing. 3, show that you want to leverage what you have learned from fund 1. So you really have to be able to show how it's going to accelerate. 4, show that this will augment what you have been accomplishing with your fund 1. 5, be clear what you will do, but importantly what you will not do with fund 2. At the end of the day, strategy is about deciding what you're not going to do. So make sure that you also are explicit about what you're not going to do with fund 2. You're going to see in this video, I'm sharing some of our internal slides that was confidential and which we declassified so that you can see what was it inside TDK, how we presented it. Lesson 2 was about how do you make sure that you can show as best as possible a good alignment on the why from why you started your CVC and your fund 2 mission and strategy. So on the slide, you can see that I'm showing what I was presenting in August 2018, which is really when I started the first proposal for the project of a corporate VC. It was not even called TDK Ventures at the time, we just called it CVC. I was showing a mountain and an helicopter, and the mountain with a person on the top was really the representation of an exploitation mission of a corporation. And the helicopter was really the corporate VC arm, which was really flying to new peaks, trying to discover new markets, new applications, new technologies, and bringing back this information. And then you can see the slide from January 2021, where I was showing to the board of directors and to the executive committee, the exploration mission was intact. It was still the same, we just wanted to augment it. And you can see I even reused the helicopter imagery so that people could see how it connected with what I had said in the past. Now, you can also see from these 2 slides how the mission of engaging with many different teams inside TDK and externally, the full ecosystem, was part of what we had already wanted to do in August 2018. And showing it in January 2021, you can see what we call an engagement map, which shows everyone inside TDK, the top key people, and how they engage with different portfolio companies. And I've hidden the names for privacy reasons, but you can see that many portfolio companies have many engagements and touch points with TDK teams and vice versa. And that was a really cool way to show visually, and I really recommend the visuals as much as you can, of engaging externally and internally. Let's move to consideration number 2, which is the launch timing for your second fund, which is really when you want to announce it publicly. And to do that, you first need to estimate when you complete building your fund 1 portfolio. So you really need to have a good view of when you're going to have your final investment that builds your final portfolio for fund 1. Then you really have to spend a lot of time to explain how reserve works, the money that you keep for follow-on investments of your existing portfolio companies. And this is really important because in most corporations, they are not going to understand that you're going to start raising fund 2 even before you have finished spending or investing the money in fund 1. And in our case, when we started raising fund 2, we had only invested 40% of our fund 1. So the question was fair. Why do you want to invest and have a new fund when you already have so much left from your fund 1? You also need to estimate and show how the reserve funds will be invested over time. You need to set the right expectation, not just for Fund 1, but also for Fund 2. That's going to really help you moving forward. And maybe here it's very important to say, but for your Fund 1, be very strategic and tactical when it comes to your deal flow and your last final few investments. You want to show a really nice trajectory where the end of your Fund 1 shows this is the beginning of Fund 2, the same trajectory. And the final lesson in this consideration is communicate your launch timing requirement consistently. You really try not to deviate from the timings that you had proposed and recommended. Let me show you an example, which is again an internal slide where I'm hiding the performance of our portfolio company, but you can see that we had 2 columns. And because we have 50% reserve, our columns are of the same height. And on the left was building a portfolio company, and we had $5.5 million left to invest in what happened to be 3 extra portfolio companies. And on the right, you can see that we had done very little follow-on investment at the time. That was last year. And so it's really green, and it shows a lot of money left to do the follow-on investment of the current portfolio companies. And here, we had a lot of good successes, good performance on the portfolio, but I made it clear that this is not what matters to decide to do Fund 2. Consideration number 3 is really when do you need to start raising your second fund? And here my recommendation is aim for 6 months. It can't be too long and it can't be too short. Not too long because you want to avoid teams fatigues and people starting losing interest. You want to keep it short and sweet. And it can't be too short either because you have a lot of things to get done. And that's what I'm going to explain next. And the first thing you need to do is to make sure that you ensure a wide consultation inside your mothership. Make sure that you involve many people that are going to be key to shaping your strategy for Fund 2. And very importantly, show that you listen to feedback. Show that you really listen to the feedback and you adjust the strategy accordingly, and you show when you do so. Also, and this is really important, is allow time to explain the launch timing. Why do you want to launch at a certain time? And this is back to what we were explaining in the consideration number 2. Finally, and this is maybe the most important, is we're talking about a lot of money. So don't be seen as rushing. It means plan ahead, show the timing clearly, and don't rush. Really take your time. This is really important for your top managements to feel that you have taken the time to build a really solid, sound strategy. So let me show you an example of how we've done it. Here you can see a slide that was even before the kickoff of raising our second fund in September 2020, where we were basically showing the next steps and a very clear timeline about when we would engage with which teams, when we go for approval, when we start planning the launch of our Fund 2 publicly. And you can see that by showing this timing, it became very clear for everyone when is the time for feedback and when it would be too late, which also meant that we had a lot of people excited to give us feedback. Now, consideration number 4 is who should get involved. And here this is our personal experience, and that's probably my personal suggestions, but first start with your team, your corporate VC team. Bottom up, work with them, with their passion, with their enthusiasm, with their technical insights into strategic spaces. Where do you want Fund 2 to go? And this is really important because you want to tap on this passion. Then you can start to engage with many key stakeholders. And here what I actually recommend is not to start with your top management. It could be very tempting to start with your top managements to get good validation and maybe to get some calibration. I actually feel like you should actually engage with all your key stakeholders, the ones that you've already engaged with Fund 1, but also the ones you want to engage with Fund 2. Make sure you meet with them and you present to as many as you can. And then document their feedback and document their appreciation. That's going to be very helpful, not just to define your strategy, but also to show to your top management that you have listened widely and you have actually collected a lot of appreciation. Then explain the financials to your finance team, to your CFO, to your investment committee, especially the reserve, which is not something corporations normally handle. So make sure you explain the financials very clearly and you spend time for that. And only after you have decided which feedback to include and which ones you don't, you can present to the top management. And make sure that you really have a clear view about what it is that you want to do and which feedback you decided to include. So let me show you what I meant by bottom-up approach with my team. And here you can see that we identified 6 strategic categories. And these 6 strategic categories, we then went and deep dive in each of them to show where the ecosystem were, where the investments were, where the technology was booming. And I've hidden the bottom part of each slide because that was showing the deal flow we had at the time we were going to look into. But you can see that we were really going into both high level and deep dive because we wanted to show that we actually knew it was going to be a good place for TDK Ventures to invest. And here I want to give a tip is to stay very simple. We had 3 criteria for deciding which areas we wanted to invest. The first one is it had to be aligned with the TDK long-term strategy. So you want to make sure that it's aligned with the long-term strategy of your mothership if, like us, you have an exploration mission. But 2, we really wanted to make sure that we want to invest in the space we believe are the right time to invest. Not the areas where it's too late to invest and it's already obvious, but also not the ones that will take 10 to 15 years to bring financial returns. So we were really focused on what are the spaces that in the next 3 years, which was what we decided for Fund 2 to be the time to build our portfolio, what are the strategic areas for the next 3 years are the right areas to invest. And the third really important criteria was to look at areas that my team was very passionate about. And passion matters because you're looking at people who are going to deep dive and create even better, higher quality due diligence, engage with entrepreneurs and VCs and CVCs to a point where they actually add value. And in our case, we really are focused with TDK Goodness to add value. And so whenever we can share deep insights with our partners, we really feel like we're adding value. Now, another example I mentioned is document key stakeholders' feedback and their appreciation. So here I've hidden the names of people who are not public for privacy reasons, but you can see at the top, we showed all the teams that we have talked to over time and when we talked to them. And at the bottom, you can see where we recorded some select appreciation that we had received. And some were about what we were doing, and some were about what we were planning to do with Fund 2, and some were more on the intangible, what was the value of TDK Ventures, and being able to augment our mission. So make sure to capture that, and I recommend to do it in one slide, so it's really nice and punchy. So consideration number 5 is how to get teams involved and extremely importantly, inspired. And here my view is that you first have to show very clear examples on when you listen to your stakeholders in the past and when they contributed and when you gave credit. So make sure that you have really nice examples of what you've done well in Fund 1 where stakeholders gave you feedback and they got value out of it. Then you need to show your progress today. You need to show a strategic mapping, and I'm going to show you an internal slide showing what I mean by strategic mapping. But you need to show how you have made good progress to date, and it has to show that you have passion and enthusiasm to scale the impact even more. Then show how Fund 2 will indeed accelerate and augment your progress to date. You really need to be able to show that. You need to visualize it. And then make sure that when you engage with these key stakeholders, you ask open questions. How can you help them? What do they want to learn? And don't assume that you know because you met with them 3 months or 6 months ago. Things move fast, and maybe what they wanted to learn 3 months ago is very different now. So let's make sure to really ask this open question and don't make too many assumptions about what your mothership and the many teams inside your mothership really want. And then document everything. Listen to every feedback, and extremely importantly, close the loop. It's a two-way engagement. So you want to make sure that you share your decision of what you include and what you don't include very clearly. You may not have a consensus, you may not agree on everything, but you want to make sure that everyone knows why you have included some and why you did not include everything. So let me give you an example about what I meant by strategic mapping. So when we started, we ended up with 15 portfolio companies, but at the time it was 12. And out of these 12, we could show that actually we had made a very nice coverage of this strategic mapping, which is across the 7 C's, so the 7 strategic areas that TDK really wants to engage in the future, in the long term, and across all the way from component level all the way to applications. And we could show that we have managed to really have a nice coverage through 12 portfolio companies, which is not so many, across the full strategic mapping. And the idea is to show that we wanted to accelerate and augment so that it becomes totally blue. So with that, I want to move to the last consideration, and it's really the last and least. And this is how much should be your second fund. And here my biggest lesson I want to share is, even though you may have a view about what should be the amount, make sure this is your strategy driving your fund size and not anything else. And that means also explain that to everyone who's been asking. And you will be asked a lot about how much you're thinking about raising the second fund. Make sure you explain that you don't know until you have defined the strategy and you have a clear view. Our fund size would have been very different if we had only 3 strategic categories versus 6, or it would have been very different if we had decided to invest more late stage versus early stage. And it probably will be very different if you invest in software companies versus hardware companies where capital requirements could be much higher and your follow-on reserve needs to be even higher. So make sure that you explain that you don't know about the fund size until you have defined the strategy and you have a clear view about it. And then one of my recommendations is ask VCs what they think, the financial VCs that you have already invested with or that you want to partner with. And here I really appreciated DBL Partners, IRA, and Capricorn, Depender being very, very candid with their feedback. And that was really helpful for me to decide what should be the fund size when I explained to them what was the strategy for it. And then your strategy still needs to be quite detailed. So you need to show the number of first investments to build your portfolio you're going to do over a number of years. In our case, 3 years. What would be the typical check size? What type of reserves do you plan to have? So you still need to have enough detail that people can visualize what it's going to be when you execute. And then, extremely important for your top management, benchmark yourself and the fund size you're going to propose with other top corporate VCs. And here I'm going to show you a very visual slide about how we did it. And that helps your top management want to put things in perspective, but also to feel comfortable that you're benchmarking yourself with the right top corporate VCs, in our case, hard tech corporate VCs. So let me show you one example of a slide where you can see on top there was 2 tables and it was very detailed and it was showing what we did with Fund 1 and what we are planning to do with Fund 2, and also how we were planning to spend over the years for building the portfolio and then for the reserve. And then the line under was basically illustrative capital calls. In our case, we were planning to make capital calls of $25 million each time. And so we were showing how it was going to be called over the years. And that's important because when you go to your board of directors and your executive committee, you want to make clear that if you ask for a fund, in our case, $150 million, it's not $150 million right now. It's actually across the years. And you also have to make clear that this is a commitment to the ecosystem. So if they approve $150 million, it means that you're going to make these capital calls across the years and they have to commit to it because you have to be able to follow on your investments and help the entrepreneurs that you've decided to bet on. Now, this is a visual slide I was talking about benchmarking with the top corporate VCs. In our case, there are 4 corporate VCs that we look up to, and we are really hoping to be as good as them, and that's Samsung, Sony, Qualcomm, and Total. And you can see how we visually showed each of them and their fund number 1, fund number 2, and for some of them more funds. Or in the case of Samsung, where it was evergreen, we made our own interpretation of what it looked like on a yearly basis. And with that, this nice visual, you could see that our first fund of 50 million was actually quite small, and 150 million is just about right. And that visual really helped our top management to feel like this was actually industry standard if you compare with the top CVCs. So with that, I would like to recap. Number 1, when you raise your second fund, be clear about the why and always communicate accordingly and consistently. 2, estimate when you need to launch your fund. Be consistent explaining that timing. 3, and this is my recommendation, plan 6 months to raise your second fund. 3 months to really raise, 1 month buffer in case you need an extra month for approval process, and 2 months for planning the launch. In our case, we did the raise in 3 months, which meant that we had 3 months to actually launch our fund 2. And that was probably the difference between we managed to get covered by Forbes versus doing just a press release. So make sure that you plan these 6 months, but you also avoid the team fatigue by doing it too long. And involve, number 4, the right stakeholders. Iterate with their feedback. Show that you're taking their feedback. 5, involve your own team, the TDK Ventures team, in my case, your venture team, and inspire every team that you engage with. You really want to have people excited and become your champions when Fund 2 is starting. And final, last and least, is the amount of your second fund. And it should be a logical conclusion from the above. It has to be something that you feel makes sense for the strategy you decided to do. And now with that, I hope you have a few good tips that you may decide to take into account for when you raise your second fund. I really wish you a really good success raising your second fund and bring even more value to entrepreneurs and accelerate their projects so that they can actually contribute to society even more. Thank you.